14 Golden Age stars who were trained killers in real life. Before they became Hollywood legends, some of these men faced real danger far from any movie set. They flew bombers, trained soldiers, served in secret missions, and carried war home in silence. Tonight we uncover the service records behind the stars. Follow and subscribe to Classic Hollywood Legends for stories fame never fully told. James Stewart. James Stewart was already famous when he chose military service, but he did not want a safe role made for publicity. He had won an Academy Award before the United States entered World War II, and the studio would have preferred to keep him in front of cameras. Stewart wanted something else. He was already a licensed pilot, and he believed he could be useful in the air. At first, even getting into the service was not simple. He was considered underweight and had to work to meet the requirement. After he joined the Army Air Forces, he trained seriously and moved through the ranks. By 1943, Stewart was in England flying B-24 Liberator bombers with the 8th Air Force. These were dangerous missions over Europe, where crews faced enemy fighters, anti-aircraft fire, bad weather, and mechanical problems that could turn deadly fast. Stewart was not there as a celebrity guest. He served as an officer responsible for men who trusted his decisions. He flew combat missions, helped lead bomber formations, and carried the pressure of bringing crews home. That kind of duty was far removed from the comfort of a movie set. There were no retakes in the sky, and no publicity department could soften what the men saw. Did James Stewart bring part of that war home with him, even if he rarely spoke about it? That question matters because Stewart did not build his public image around war stories. After returning to Hollywood, he went back to work quietly. But many viewers noticed something different in his later performances. The warmth was still there, but so was a deeper strain. In It's a Wonderful Life, Winchester 73, and Vertigo, he could show fear, anger, guilt, and exhaustion in a way that felt very real. Stewart continued serving in the Air Force Reserve after the war, and eventually became a brigadier general. He died in 1997 at 89 years old. His legacy is not only that he played good men on screen, it is that when history demanded more from him, he stepped forward, served seriously, and carried the experience with quiet dignity. Neville Brand. Neville Brand had a face Hollywood knew how to use. He often played gangsters, criminals, hard men, and characters who looked like they had already crossed a line. In films like DOA and Stalag 17, he brought a rough presence that did not feel polished or safe. Viewers believed the danger because there was something real behind it. That reality came partly from his life before acting. Brand served in the U.S. Army during World War II and saw combat in Europe. He was a staff sergeant with the 331st Infantry Regiment of the 83rd Infantry Division. In March 1945, he received the Silver Star for gallantry in action in Germany. He was also wounded during the war and received the Purple Heart. Those facts are strong enough without exaggeration. For years, stories claimed that Brand was one of the most decorated American soldiers of World War II. That claim has been repeated often, but it should be treated carefully because it has been disputed. The truth is still impressive. He served, fought, was wounded, and came home carrying experiences most actors could only imagine. Did Neville Brand become a convincing screen villain because he understood real fear better than most men around him? That question matters because his performances were not loud in a fake way. He could look tired, angry, suspicious, or dangerous without doing too much. The war seemed to leave a weight on him, and Hollywood turned that weight into a career. But there is something sad about that too. A man who had lived through real violence was often asked to turn that darkness into entertainment. Brand worked steadily for decades in film and television. He appeared in westerns, crime dramas, war films, and later became familiar to many viewers through television roles. He was not usually the leading man, but he was memorable. When he entered a scene, the mood often changed. Neville Brand died in 1992 at 71 years old. His story is not just about playing tough men. It is about a veteran whose real wartime service followed him into Hollywood, even when the roles only showed part of the man. Audie Murphy. Audie Murphy came home from World War II with a record so extreme that Hollywood later had to soften parts of it for the screen. He was not built like the usual war hero. He was small young and looked almost too boyish for the things he had survived. But by the end of the war, Murphy had become one of the most decorated American combat soldiers of World War II. He served with the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division and fought through some of the hardest campaigns in Europe. His Medal of Honor came after a battle in France in January 1945, when he helped hold off a German attack while his men pulled back. He climbed onto a burning tank destroyer and used its machine gun while exposed to enemy fire. It was the kind of act that sounds invented, but it was part of his real military record. After the war, Hollywood brought him in, and Murphy eventually played himself into Hell and Back. The film became a major success, but even that version could not fully explain what war had done to him. On screen, audiences saw the young soldier who survived. Off-screen, Murphy struggled with nightmares, anxiety, insomnia, and the memories he carried home. Did America know how to honor Audie Murphy, but not how to help him live afterward? That question matters because Murphy's story did not end with medals. He became a working actor, especially in westerns, but he was never just another cowboy star. There was always a quiet weight behind him. He had seen real combat before Hollywood ever handed him a prop gun. That kind of experience does not disappear because the cameras start rolling. Murphy also spoke publicly about the emotional cost of war at a time when many men were expected to stay silent. That took a different kind of courage. He was not perfect, and his life after combat was often difficult, but he helped make room for veterans to talk about what we now understand as PTSD. Audie Murphy died in a plane crash in 1971 at only 45 years old. His story is not just about bravery. It is about what a young man gave what he carried home and what fame could never repair. Charles Bronson. Charles Bronson's toughness did not begin in Hollywood. Long before audiences knew him from Death Wish, The Magnificent Seven, or The Great Escape, he had already lived through poverty, hard labor, and war. He was born Charles Dennis Bukinski in Pennsylvania coal country, one of many children in a poor family. Before acting ever became possible, he worked in the mines where silence, endurance, and physical strength were part of daily life. World War II added another layer to that hard beginning. Bronson served in the U.S. Army Air Forces and became an aerial gunner on a B-29 Superfortress. His service was not in Europe, as some retellings mistakenly suggest, but in the Pacific Theater. Based in Guam with the 61st Bombardment Squadron, he flew combat missions against Japan. Those flights were dangerous in a very direct way. A bomber crew lived with engine trouble, enemy fire, long hours in the air, and the knowledge that one mission could be the last. Bronson flew 25 missions and received a Purple Heart for wounds suffered in combat. He was not the kind of man who later turned that into long speeches. Like many veterans of his generation, he carried it quietly. After the war, he returned to civilian life, studied art through the GI Bill, and eventually found his way into acting. Did Charles Bronson look tough on screen because he had already learned what fear really was? That question matters because his screen presence was never loud. He did not need big gestures or long speeches. His face, his pause, and the way he looked at people did much of the work. Directors used him as a hard man, a gunman, a prisoner, a fighter, or a man seeking justice. Audiences believed him because there was little about him that felt artificial. Charles Bronson died in 2003 at 81 years old. His war service should not be turned into action movie exaggeration. The real story is strong enough. A poor miner's son who survived combat, rebuilt his life, and became one of Hollywood's most believable tough men. Lee Marvin. A wound from Saipan followed Lee Marvin long after the war was over. It was not something a studio created for a role. Marvin served in the U.S. Marine Corps during World War II and fought in the Pacific, where the fighting was close, harsh, and unforgiving. At Saipan, he was badly wounded, and the injury left him with lasting physical damage. He was still a young man, but he had already seen more violence than most actors would ever have to imagine. When Marvin came to Hollywood, directors quickly understood what kind of presence he had. He did not look polished or safe. He had a hard voice, a cold stare, and a way of standing still that made people pay attention. In films like The Man Who Shot Liberty, Valance Point Blank, and The Dirty Dozen, he often played men who knew danger too well. The difference was that Marvin did not have to fake that knowledge. His war experience did not make him a simple, tough guy. It made him more complicated. There was humor in him, and he proved that clearly when he won an Academy Award for Cat Ballou. But even in lighter roles, there was still something guarded underneath. Audiences could feel that he was not just playing roughness for style. Was Lee Marvin acting like a hard man, or was he showing pieces of what the war had left behind? That question matters because his best performances never felt empty. He understood fear, discipline, pain, and silence. He also understood that real violence was not glamorous. It changed people. It left marks that did not always show on the surface. Lee Marvin died in 1987 at 63 years old. He remains one of Hollywood's most believable tough men, but the reason goes deeper than his voice or his face. When he walked into a scene, he carried the weight of a man who had already faced real danger and lived with the memory of it. Telly Savalas. Telly Savalas was already a grown man before Hollywood turned him into a familiar face. He was not one of those actors who seemed built in a studio office. His life had taken him through military service, radio work, television production, and years of ordinary pressure before the camera finally found him. That background helped give him the calm, controlled manner people later recognized on screen. During World War II, Savalas served in the U.S. Army. The safer version of his record places him in a medical training unit at Camp Pickett, Virginia, rather than in frontline combat in the Pacific. Some stories about his service have grown louder over time, but they should not be repeated as fact without care. What is clear is that he served during the war years and was later discharged after a serious car accident that left him injured and recovering. That part of his life matters because not every military story has to involve famous battles to be real. Savalas was not Audie Murphy or Lee Marvin. His war experience was quieter, but it still belonged to the same generation of men whose lives were shaped by service, discipline, injury, and uncertainty. Was Telly Savalas powerful on screen because he never looked like he had anything to prove? That question fits him well. When he acted, he did not push too hard. In Birdman of Alcatraz, The Dirty Dozen, on Her Majesty's Secret Service and later Kojak, he carried authority without needing long speeches. He could seem warm in one moment and dangerous in the next. That balance made him memorable. The bald head and the lollipop became his trademark, but they were only part of the image. Underneath was a man who had lived a full life before fame arrived. He understood patience, pain, and control, and those qualities showed in the way he handled a scene. Telly Savalas died in 1994 at 72 years old. His story should not be inflated into something it was not. The honest version is strong enough: a veteran, a late-blooming actor, and a man whose quiet command made him unforgettable. Kirk Douglas. On a small submarine chaser in the Pacific, Kirk Douglas learned a kind of pressure Hollywood could not teach. Before he became one of the most intense actors of his generation, He served in the U.S. Navy during World War II. His birth name was Ishur Danielovich, and he came from a poor immigrant family in New York. Nothing about his early life suggested comfort. He worked hard, fought for an education, and carried a hunger that later showed up in many of his roles. Douglas joined the Navy after the United States entered the war. He trained as an officer and served aboard PC-139, a submarine chaser operating in the Pacific. His work involved anti-submarine duty communications and gunnery responsibility. It was not glamorous service. The men on those ships lived with long watches tension and the constant possibility that one mistake could cost lives. His military career ended after he was injured in an accident involving a depth charge. He was medically discharged in 1944, but the experience stayed with him. When he returned to civilian life, he did not immediately become a movie star. He worked in radio theater and smaller roles before Hollywood began to understand what he had. Did the war help give Kirk Douglas the edge audiences later saw on screen? That question makes sense because Douglas rarely seemed soft in his best roles. In Champion Ace, in The Whole Paths of Glory, and Spartacus, he often played men driven by pride, anger, ambition, or moral pressure. Even when the character was wrong, Douglas made him feel alive. He had a way of showing struggle without asking the audience to pity him. His wartime service was not the whole reason for that intensity. Poverty, ambition, and personality mattered too. But serving in the Navy gave him a direct understanding of discipline, danger, and responsibility. Those things helped shape the man who later stood up to studios, built his own production company, and fought for control over his work. Kirk Douglas died in 2020 at 103 years old. His life stretched from hardship to war to Hollywood legend, and the toughness people saw on screen had roots far deeper than acting. Clint Eastwood. At Fort Ord in the early 1950s, Clint Eastwood was not yet the man audiences would later know from westerns, crime films, and quiet stare-downs. He was a young Army draftee during the Korean War era, serving in California rather than fighting overseas. His assignment was not front-line combat. He worked as a swimming instructor, a fact that often gets lost when people try to make his military record sound larger than it was. But one event from that period was real and dangerous. In 1951, Eastwood was aboard a Navy aircraft that went down in the Pacific near Point Reyes. He survived the crash, got out of the sinking plane, and made it through cold water before reaching land. That was not a battlefield, but it was still a close call with death. For a young man with no Hollywood career yet, it was the kind of experience that could stay in the back of the mind for life. Did that crash help shape the calm, watchful quality people later saw in him? There is no way to prove that completely, but it is easy to see why the question comes up. Eastwood's screen image was never built on shouting or showing fear. In Rawhide, the Sergio Leone westerns, and later the Dirty Harry films, he often played men who waited, measured the room, and acted only when they had to. That stillness became part of his power. His military service should not be exaggerated. He was not a decorated combat veteran, and turning him into one would be unfair to the men who were. The stronger story is simpler. He served, survived a serious crash, and later built a career around characters who rarely panicked under pressure. Clint Eastwood's connection to the military is not about battlefield glory. It is about discipline, survival, and how one frightening moment before fame may have helped shape the controlled presence that made him unforgettable on screen. Sterling Hayden. Sterling Hayden never seemed fully comfortable with Hollywood, even when Hollywood wanted him. He was tall, good-looking, and promoted early as a strong leading man type, but the movie business did not satisfy him in the way the sea did. Before acting became his public identity, Hayden had already lived as a sailor, and that restless part of him never really left. During World War II, he stepped away from film and entered military service. To keep his fame from getting in the way, he used the name John Hamilton. His wartime work took him far from the safety of studio sets. He served with the Office of Strategic Services, the wartime intelligence agency that came before the CIA, and worked with resistance forces in the Balkans. His missions involved dangerous travel supply work and contact with Yugoslav partisans fighting against German occupation. Hayden later received the Silver Star for his service. That fact alone separates him from many actors who only played brave men on screen. But what makes his story more interesting is that he did not seem to enjoy being turned into a simple hero. After the war, he returned to Hollywood, but there was always a distance between him and the industry. He acted because it paid him, but he often spoke as if he belonged somewhere else. Was Sterling Hayden running toward danger, or running away from the life Hollywood wanted for him? That question fits much of his career. In films like The Asphalt Jungle, The Killing, and later Dr. Strangelove, Hayden often played men with heaviness behind the eyes. He looked like someone who had made hard choices and could still feel them. That was not just screen style. His real life had already given him experience with secrecy, risk, guilt, and regret. His later years included writing Sailing Political Regret and a continued dislike for the machinery of fame. Sterling Hayden died in 1986 at 70 years old. He was not only a film noir face or a Hollywood tough man. He was a sailor, a veteran, an OSS operative, and a man who never fully belonged to the business that made him known. Robert Ryan. Robert Ryan's time in uniform was not the kind of story that needs to be made bigger to sound important. During World War II, he served in the U.S. Marine Corps as a drill instructor at Camp Pendleton. He was not sent overseas as a combat Marine, and he was not presented as a battlefield hero. His job was different. He helped train young men who might soon be facing combat themselves. That kind of work still leaves a mark. A drill instructor sees fear before it becomes combat fear. He sees boys forced to become harder, faster, and more disciplined, because the war will not wait for them to grow up slowly. Ryan understood that process from close range. He saw how men were shaped for violence, and later in life that knowledge seemed to sit behind many of his performances. Hollywood often cast him as bitter, dangerous, or quietly threatening. In Crossfire: Bad Day at Black Rock, the setup and the Wild Bunch, he could make a scene tense without shouting. He had a controlled way of speaking, and his face often looked like a man holding something back. That restraint made him believable. He did not play menace like a cartoon. He played it like something built over time. How does a man help prepare others for war, then spend his life questioning what violence does to people? That is what makes Ryan interesting. Off-screen, he was known for supporting civil rights and anti-war causes. That contrast gave his career more weight. He could play cruel men, racist men, and broken men, but he did not seem to admire them. He seemed to understand where darkness could come from. Robert Ryan died in 1973 at 63 years old. His military service should not be inflated into frontline legend. The real version is better a Marine drill instructor, a thoughtful man, and an actor who knew that toughness without conscience was never the whole story. Yul Brynner. The important point with Yul Brynner is simple: his war record should not be made into something it was not. He was not a frontline combat soldier, and there is no need to turn him into one for the story to matter. His real connection to World War II came through radio work language and wartime communication, not battlefield action. Brynner was born in Vladivostok and lived through a restless early life before becoming famous. He spent years in Europe before reaching America, and that background gave him a different kind of understanding of war. During World War II, he worked for U.S. wartime information services, including broadcasts connected to the Office of War Information and Voice of America. His voice was used to reach people overseas, especially in languages and cultures he knew well. That was not the same as carrying a rifle, but information was still part of the war effort. Does service only count when it happens under gunfire? That question matters with Brenner, because his later image was so commanding that people sometimes want his real life to match the roles. On stage and screen, he seemed like a man born to give orders. In The King and I, The 10 Commandments, and The Magnificent Seven, he carried himself with control and authority. But that authority did not have to come from combat. It came from a life shaped by movement, survival, discipline, and reinvention. Brenner built one of the most recognizable images in Hollywood: the shaved head, the direct stare, the measured voice. Yet behind that image was a man who had lived through political change, exile, war years, and hard personal turns before fame made him look untouchable. Yul Brynner died in 1985 at 65 years old. His wartime story is strongest when told honestly. He was not a battlefield legend, but he did serve the war effort, and his life, before Hollywood, gave his screen presence a seriousness that audiences could feel. Charlton Heston. Charlton Heston served in World War II before he ever became the kind of actor people associated with command strength and large historical roles. His military record is sometimes told with extra drama, but the real version does not need that. He was not a Marine, and he did not take part in the Iwo Jima invasion. He served in the U.S. Army Air Forces as a radio operator and aerial gunner on B-25 Mitchell bombers. His duty took him to the Aleutian Islands, a cold and difficult part of the war that rarely gets the attention of the larger battles in Europe or the Pacific. The work was serious. A bomber crew had to depend on each man doing his job under pressure. Weather could be dangerous. Mechanical problems could turn quickly. Even far from the most famous battlefields, the men serving there understood that war did not need publicity to be frightening. Did Charlton Heston's time in uniform help shape the authority he later carried on screen? It is easy to see why people make that connection. Heston became known for roles that required discipline and presence. In The 10 Commandments, Ben-Hur, El Cid, and Planet of the Apes, he often played men facing responsibility, danger, or moral pressure. He had a voice and posture that made audiences believe he belonged in those roles. But that strength should not be explained by myth. It came from a mix of military service, personal discipline, hard work, and the seriousness he brought to acting. After the war, Heston built a long career and became one of the most recognizable faces in classic Hollywood. He was not the most decorated veteran in this story, and he was not a battlefield legend like Audie Murphy or Lee Marvin. Still, he served his country during a dangerous time and came home with the kind of self-control that later became part of his screen identity. Charlton Heston died in 2008 at 84 years old. His legacy is strongest when told honestly: a major actor, a World War II veteran, and a man whose public image was built on real discipline rather than exaggeration. Clark Gable. Carole Lombard's death in 1942 changed Clark Gable before the war uniform ever did. She had been the great love of his life, and when she was killed in a plane crash while returning from a war bond tour, Gable was left shaken. A few months later, already one of the biggest stars in America, he joined the U.S. Army Air Forces. This was not the easiest choice for a man Hollywood still wanted on screen. Gable could have stayed useful through public appearances and morale work. Instead, he went through officer training and aerial gunnery instruction. He was no young unknown trying to prove himself. He was Clark Gable, the man audiences knew from It Happened One Night and Gone with the Wind, learning how to work around bombers, crews, cameras, and real danger. His assignment took him to England with the 351st Bomb Group. Officially, much of his job involved helping make Combat America, a documentary meant to show bomber crews what war in the air looked like. But Gable did not stay safely on the ground. He flew operational missions in B-17 over Europe to get the footage he believed the film needed. Was Clark Gable chasing duty grief or both? That question makes his service feel more human. He was not a career soldier, and he should not be exaggerated into one. But he did step into a dangerous world when he had every reason not to. A bomber mission over Europe was never just a scene for the camera. Anti-aircraft fire, enemy fighters, and mechanical failure could kill famous men as quickly as unknown ones. After the war, Gable returned to Hollywood, but his image carried a different weight. He remained a star, yet the easy glamour was no longer the whole story. Clark Gable died in 1960 at 59 years old. His wartime record shows a man who had fame, comfort, and protection, but still chose to serve when history asked more from him.